you see a pale hand pressed against the glass in the dead of night, your first instinct is to lean in and look. Don't. Tonight, we are looking at 3 true, deeply unsettling experiences from people who thought their isolated night shifts were perfectly safe, until they realized they weren't alone. It was Tuesday at 2:44 a.m. when my shift turned into a nightmare. I worked at an isolated toll plaza on the edge of the state line, a long, dead stretch of highway surrounded by nothing but dense pine trees. I actually liked the isolation. I'd sit in my tiny, glass-enclosed booth, drink cheap coffee, and listen to podcasts. It was supposed to be the easiest job in the world. Around 3 a.m., a beat-up gray sedan rolled up to my lane. The driver didn't look at me. He just held out a crumpled dollar bill. He was in his late 30s, wearing a faded green jacket. The smell of sour body odor and stale cigarette smoke rolled out of his open window, hitting me right in the face. I took the money, handed him his change, and lifted the gate, but instead of driving through, he just sat there for a few seconds. He finally pulled forward, but then he pulled onto the dark shoulder, just 50 feet past my booth, and parked. He killed the headlights but left the engine running. I could hear the rhythmic, rattling hum of his muffler echoing in the quiet night. At first, I didn't panic. I figured his GPS had lost signal, or maybe his check engine light came on. You see a lot of tired drivers making weird stops out here. 10 minutes went by, then 20. I tried to focus on my phone, but I kept glancing up. Through the glare of the booth's fluorescent lights, I could just make out his silhouette in the driver's seat. He wasn't looking down at a phone. The glow of a screen never lit up his face. He was just sitting in the pitch black, with his body turned entirely toward my booth. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself he was just sleeping, but my chest tightened, making it hard to take a full breath. Around 30:40 a.m., I heard his car door open and click shut. I looked up. The driver's seat was empty. I scanned the dark highway. Nothing. Then, I caught movement near the edge of the tree line to my right, just past the glow of the street lamps. He was standing in the tall grass, completely motionless. His head was tilted slightly, just staring at me from the shadows. He didn't have a flashlight. He wasn't stretching his legs. My hand started shaking so badly I dropped my pen. I picked up the landline to call the state troopers, but the line was dead. A storm had knocked out the physical lines 2 days prior, and cell service out here was basically non-existent. I was totally alone. I locked the booth door and backed into the corner, keeping my eyes glued to the tree line. But when a patch of fog rolled through, I lost sight of him. For 10 agonizing minutes, the highway was dead quiet. I convinced myself he got cold and walked back to his car. Then I heard the wet crunch of gravel directly behind my booth. I spun around. He was standing inches from the back window. His face was pressed so close to the glass his breath was fogging it up. He didn't blink. He just stared at me with completely dead eyes. Without breaking eye contact, he reached a hand around to the side of the booth. I heard the heavy, metallic clank of the door handle being pushed down. He was testing the lock. He pushed it again, harder this time. The cheap metal rattled. I scrambled backwards, knocking over my coffee cup. "Get away!" I screamed, though I knew the thick glass muffled my voice. He didn't react. He just kept pulling the handle, throwing his weight against the frame. The hinges groaned. I grabbed my heavy metal flashlight, raising it above my head, preparing to strike the glass if he broke through. Just then, a low rumble vibrated through the ground. A massive 18-wheeler was cresting the hill, its bright high beams flooding the toll plaza. The man froze. He looked at the approaching lights, then back at me. He let go of the handle, stepped back into the shadows, and slid down the steep dirt embankment into the woods. The truck roared past, shaking my booth, and then vanished down the highway. The plaza fell completely silent again. I didn't see his car leave. I had 3 hours left on my shift. I sat on the floor of that booth until the sun came up, clutching that flashlight. I knew he was still out there in the trees, just waiting for the dark to return. It was Thursday at 4:15 p.m. when the first interaction happened. I was 3 weeks into my season working at a fire lookout tower. perched 60 feet above the canopy of a massive national forest. The closest paved road was a 2-hour hike away. It was an isolating job, just me, a two-way radio, and a glass-walled cabin in the sky. I had climbed down to check the base perimeter when a man stepped out from the tree line. He was older, wearing a heavy wool coat despite the heavy summer heat. The overwhelming stench of wet wool and rotting pine needles washed over me as he approached. He didn't introduce himself. "Quiet up there," he muttered, gesturing to the tower. I offered a polite nod, assuming he was just a socially inept local hiker who rarely spoke to people. "You write your sevens with a cross through the middle," he said, staring at the daily fire danger board I maintained at the trailhead. "It's a very distinct habit, very precise." I laughed it off awkwardly. I figured he was just lonely and making weird small talk. He lingered for another minute before wandering back into the dense brush. 3 days later, I was on the catwalk of the tower right before sunset. I looked down, and he was standing at the base of the structure, staring straight up at me. I leaned over the railing and asked if he needed water or directions. He didn't answer right away. He just stared with these flat, unblinking eyes. "You always turn your lantern off at exactly 11:30 p.m. His voice drifted up, strangely calm. "And you check the trapdoor lock twice before you go to sleep." A heavy, tight knot formed in the center of my chest, making it hard to swallow. The physical sensation of being hunted hit me all at once. He wasn't just passing through. He had been watching, clocking my routines in the dead of night from the forest floor. I backed into the glass cabin and locked the door. By the time I forced myself to look out the window again, the base of the tower was empty. I didn't see him for the next 4 days. I kept my head down, telling myself he had moved on to another part of the park. Then came Tuesday. A female day hiker came up the trail and yelled up to me, saying she found a black leather logbook dropped near the lower water tank. She left it on the bottom steps and hiked away. I climbed down the 60 feet of metal stairs to retrieve it, hoping it was just a trail journal. I opened it to the first page. It wasn't writing. It was a highly detailed charcoal sketch of the tower. I flipped the page. It was a sketch of me sitting at the radio desk. The angle was drawn from the outside catwalk, looking in through the glass. I flipped again. A drawing of me sleeping in my cot. The perspective was from directly above my bed. My hands started trembling so violently I dropped the book into the dirt. He hadn't just been at the base of the tower. He had been inside with me. A loud crack of thunder rolled across the valley. The sky turned a bruised purple as a massive summer storm system rapidly closed in. I ran back up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. I grabbed the radio mic to call the ranger station for an immediate evac. I keyed the mic. Nothing but the heavy, rhythmic crackle of dead static spat back at me. The storm was already scrambling the frequency. I dropped the mic and turned to the heavy metal trapdoor set into the floor of the cabin. The heavy iron latch was flipped open. I had locked it that morning. I know I did. The metal was cold under my hands as I slammed the heavy bolt shut and dragged my desk over it. I sat on the floor, surrounded by glass windows, as the rain started to pound against the roof. I spent the entire night listening to the wind howl. I just sat there in the dark, waiting to hear the metallic screech of footsteps on the stairs below. The Rangers pulled me out the next afternoon when the storm cleared. I never went back to that tower. I still live with the blinds drawn in my apartment, because every time I close my eyes, I wonder exactly how many nights he stood over my bed before I found that book. It was a Wednesday at 11:15 p.m. when I first noticed the vehicle. I worked as the night shift janitor for a massive, sprawling high school in the suburbs. It was a labyrinth of long corridors and isolated wings. The building was dead quiet at that hour. The only thing keeping me company was the sharp, chemical sting of industrial bleach and the relentless hum of the lights above me. Around midnight, I was hauling 3 heavy trash bags out to the back bins. The dumpster sat in a deep architectural blind spot right behind the gymnasium, an area tucked behind a high brick retaining wall that the security cameras couldn't quite reach. That's when I saw it. A plain white van was parked backed up against the brick wall, idling with its headlights completely off. I didn't panic right away. I rationalized it, figuring it was just a lost delivery driver trying to find a loading address, or maybe a contractor waiting for the morning crew to arrive. I walked over to the driver's side window to tell him he couldn't park there. The tinted window rolled down just a fraction of an inch. A man in his late 40s stared back at me. He waved his hands dismissively, feigning a heavy language barrier. "No English. Wrong way," he mumbled, but he wasn't looking at my face. His eyes were fixed entirely on the heavy metal doors leading into the boiler room right behind me. He didn't blink once. I took a step back, and that's when I saw the second vehicle. Another identical van was parked 50 yards away in the dark, entirely blacked out. The driver of the first van slammed his vehicle into gear. He sped off toward the exit, and the second van immediately pulled out to follow him in perfect, unnatural synchronization. A cold prickle of sweat traced down my spine. I finished my shift, locked every door twice, and tried to convince myself it was just a strange coincidence. The next night, Thursday at 1:30 a.m., I was sitting in the security office taking my lunch break. I glanced up at the monitor showing the cafeteria loading dock. Both vans were back. They were parked perfectly parallel to the loading ramp, their engines running. Two men were standing outside the vehicles. They were arguing in hushed, aggressive gestures, constantly pointing their fingers toward the cafeteria wing. My chest tightened until it hurt. The air in the tiny office felt suffocatingly thin. I reached for my radio to call the police, but my hands were shaking so badly I knocked it off the desk. Right as the radio hit the floor, a deafening shriek ripped through the silent school. The fire alarm. A teacher who had stayed late in the science wing had burned her microwave dinner, tripping the sensitive smoke detectors. The rhythmic, ear-piercing blare echoed down the empty hallways. On the security screen, the two men panicked. They scrambled back into their vans, tires squealing as they tore out of the parking lot and disappeared into the night. The fire department arrived 10 minutes later and cleared the building. After they left, I walked down to the cafeteria loading dock with my flashlight to check the perimeter. I shined my beam on the heavy steel doors. The deadbolt was completely sheared off the metal, twisted and ruined. The doors were already pried open about 2 inches. I realized the truth right then. They weren't out there trying to figure out how to break in. They had already breached the building hours ago. They were just sitting out there, waiting for me to isolate myself in that empty wing. I quit the very next morning. Even now, I can't walk past a parked van without checking my rearview mirror, wondering who is sitting in the dark, just waiting for the right moment